everything you're doing right now sucks, but it is going to pay off in the long run. Don't hate your life every day right now because it's going to be okay.
Hey there, everybody. Hey there, career changers. Welcome to Career Therapy, the podcast. Today we have with us Eddie Patzsch, and we are going to be chatting about taking risks and experimenting with things in your career, how to test, how to learn, how to grow. Eddie's had a really interesting history, and we met back in 2014, back when I was with Idea Lemon, one of my first startups. And we were teaching a personal pitch, like personal branding course, I think you came to, called Discover Your Inner Awesome. And I actually just found the email earlier today. And apparently you got locked out of the building, or we didn't let you into the building, and you missed one. We had to go through a whole rigmarole to get you another refund in a class and all this other stuff. So it's kind of
seriously
how that.
I actually didn't even remember the topic, what it was about.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting. What else do you have there?
Well, so apparently I taught you how to do elevator pitches years ago. So if yours isn't perfect, 100% amazing, I'm clearly going to judge you.
Any success I have had goes back to Martin.
The cool things that you were doing back then was you had a peer-to-peer travel company. You worked on something called Traveler. And then you moved to New York. So right when we started getting to know each other, you went and traveled a bit. So, I'm going to introduce you here by reading off your LinkedIn profile. And then I'd love for you to just sort of fill us in about your journey from maybe those early days when you went to New York, what brought you back to Chicago, and what you're doing now. So your LinkedIn profile says that you are an account-based marketing consultant, mentor, and advisor. Eddie, tell us about yourself. A quick pause before Eddie does introduce himself. This is Martin from after the podcast was recorded. We actually have some great news to celebrate for Eddie. He got a promotion the same week that we recorded this episode. So the title that I just read off is no longer accurate. And this is Martin from a few days later chiming back in to give a little update on Eddie's current role. So Eddie, I'm going to read off your job title from your LinkedIn, and then I'll let you get back to telling us about yourself. All right. Eddie is now the Principal Strategic Growth and Go-to-Market, GTM, at Rollworks, a division of Nextroll Inc., and he is also a co-founder, mentor, and advisor. All right. Now back to Eddie. Tell us about yourself.
Well, all right. My full-time gig is at a software company. It's called Rollworks. It's the B2B arm of a company called AdRoll. And so Rollworks is an account-based marketing platform, and I do enterprise strategic sales there. So that's my full-time thing. I also on the side, I'm a founder at a different software. It's called Partner Portal. I'm doing both those. The advisor part, I'm getting there. I'm advising a few companies now, but definitely really primarily focused on a lot of the account-based activity that's happening right now.
That's awesome. And I know that your career has kind of gone through a number of shifts over the years. And one of the key things that I see kind of continually come up is your ability to experiment, your ability to test things, to try things, to enter into new arenas that maybe aren't fully what your day job is, and to adapt and learn and things like that. What was maybe the earliest side project that you recall working on outside of your day job back in the days?
Yeah, it started when I was 14. If we want to go back, but we don't have to go back too far. But even in school, I was always trying to kind of have my own little hustles going on. I think I was in fourth or fifth grade, and my neighbor and I started a popcorn company where we'd take popcorn out of his mom's cabinet, and we'd put different flavorings and seasonings in it, and we called it HSP, which was hot and spicy popcorn. So that was one of the first things.
That's an awesome name. That is an awesome name.
Yeah, I think Tabasco or somebody ended up doing it a couple of years ago, which I thought was pretty funny. They definitely ripped my idea, but we'd go around and we put them in baggies, like 25-cent Ziploc bags. And then for like the holiday seasons, we do like green and red. So we were just like kids.
This is a legit business, though. I mean, there are
legit.
people making insane, insane profits in the popcorn business.
Yeah, no, it's big time. If I were to, I should have pursued. It would have definitely IPO'd by now. But yeah, so like I've always had kind of a side hustle, or at least like some type of job. In high school, I was also like doing things like working at Cold Stone, passing out flyers for real estate agents, working and doing my buddies like dad's filing and things. So it's kind of started at a young age. My mom was a single mom and a foreigner, so she didn't really have much like input into like what she thought I should be doing outside of you should be a doctor or a lawyer. It's kind of like the two considerations initially. But what I started to learn was that there were many other opportunities and things that I could do. So I ended up actually starting my career in college, initially in entertainment. And so while I was at Chapman in California, I was working for, I did an NBC Universal internship and an MTV internship. That's and awesome. So that was like kind of my realization of there's these big concepts, big businesses happening. I don't need to be intimidated by them. Like I could actually, there's an opportunity to get in there. And it became a little bit realer and more realistic for me once those things started to happen.
Well, that's a really interesting sort of, juxtaposition, right? So your mom's view of things was like doctor, the traditional occupations, right? And then there's just everything that's going on in the media world, which seems so far away. And maybe you're in California, so maybe it felt a little bit closer. But people, I think the number one job that teenagers want to have when they grow up right now is influencer. That's the number one thing that I think 80% of the population is saying they want to be influencers, which how do you have 80% of people being influencers? That just seems crazy.
So crazy.
But you kind of were in there in the early, like not the early days, but like you were in there when, what were some of the shows that were on TV when you were in that industry?
Yeah. So once I graduated, I started full-time at MTV. So the shows I was working on were Parental Control, which is like a dating show. Not proud of that. Not proud of that one.
Is that where the parents would watch the dates on TV?
Exactly. So my job was to get people to go on MTV. So I did casting, and I would go out, set up events, go up to random people, give them my business card. And I mean, there was times, this is kind of like a bad story, but there were times where we couldn't find people to get on the show. And I think at one point I ended up casting a brother and a sister that pretended like they were dating on the show because the girl really wanted to go on MTV, and they did that. So that just to show you what kind of happens in the back end of these.
Reality TV is real, right? The Kardashians actually look like that. And everything is 100% on point. And I'm
totally. 100%. I got off that show and I ended up working on True Life, which is a little bit more of like a respectable documentary series is what it was. But yeah, I mean, what I realized like after a couple of years is just entertainment wasn't really for me. It was the celebrity type thing didn't really get me that excited. And just the idea of being like a Lloyd from Entourage, or like we're having to work your way up from the mailroom and all that stuff. It didn't really appeal to me.
And so when you had that realization, I feel like, how many years in were you in the entertainment industry when you had that?
I'd interned for NBC for a year. So I was pushing on like 3.5 years.
3.5 years. Yeah. And I feel like those are the moments where we're like, we're either going to do this the rest of our life and commit to this, or we have to make a change. Like, I feel like that 2, 3, 4 year mark is like where people really feel like they need to shift. So you're in California at the time, right? And where was your head at? What options? Because again, we're talking about like sometimes we can get super focused on like, oh, these are the options ahead of me, and kind of lose the forest from the tree, right? And like,
Yeah.
so how did you start breaking away from that? How did you start figuring out what other types of careers exist and other things you could do?
Yeah, I mean the thing there is the for one, there was some sacrifice that went into each job that I've had, and like the sacrifice there was I was commuting from Orange County to LA, which could be hours, like 2.5 hours each way sometimes. And then for the internships, they were unpaid, and so it was like one of those things initially where I was like, okay, this is like a lot of sacrifices. Like, when is this going to start to pay off? And as exciting and glamorous as it was, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Thankfully, so I look at it as a thankfully, but in like 2008, MTV laid off a lot of people. So I was part of the group that was like, let go. At that time, it wasn't a big deal to me because I was still pretty early in my career. It wasn't like I had kids or anything like that. But it was like a time for me to reflect and figure out, okay, now I can go do something different. I actually, at the time, me and 4 other guys in California decided we should move and really change it up. So we started to think of places to go even before I was even knew what industry I was going to go in or do anything. And we ended up doing 4 cities in a hat, and we played the hat game. So it was like New York, Chicago, Barcelona, and like Buenos Aires. Chicago got pulled, and so me and 4 other guys individually came out here to Chicago, shared an apartment. It was just one of those like weird moves where we all were on the same page kind of thing.
That's amazing. What age
Yeah.
around was this?
Too old to be doing that. I think we were like 24, 25. So
I don't
yeah,
know.
I
I
mean,
think that's fair. I think that's a fair age. I did a similar thing around that age, maybe a little even later, quitting my job and doing a road trip around the country. So, I mean, those are the kinds of things I feel like doing that early on, especially before family, before, larger life commitments. It helps you be more secure in the decisions you make later, I feel like.
yeah, no, that's a good point. I guess it's like that quarter life crisis kind of thing, but I think everyone needs to do that kind of stuff. I traveled a lot in my 20s. That was like my thing. But that was a big deal at the time. And the weird thing is I didn't have a job, so don't ever do that. But one of my friends had already gotten here, and he's like, Eddie, he's like, why don't you apply to some sales jobs? And then all the like stereotypical things about being in sales came to mind, which you could probably like assume: pushy, sleazy, all those things. And he's like, look, he's like, your job now is to convince people to go on MTV. Like, you're convincing people to go on. You're selling them on, putting themselves on national TV. He's like, so if you could do that in a business capacity, like, you're basically doing sales. And so I applied to some sales jobs literally from the car while we were heading out. And we got here on a Friday. I had an interview lined up Monday. And by that week, so it was a total week in Chicago, I got the job. So all of a sudden I was in sales.
Wow. That's and just knowing that transferable skill in that story, like that, I think people have a hard time connecting previous roles to future roles when they're trying to make a change like that.
Yeah.
What was it that
I definitely think that's hard.
Yeah. Did you feel like when you sat down for that sales role, like I coach a lot of people in sales, and they work in customer service, they work in a whole lot of different industries, but they just don't make that connection. What do you think like that barrier is that folks might be having?
I think that people need to, what I think helped with me is that I'm a very open person, open to the feedback I hear from my friends, my family, strangers. I listen. And so like when a friend, like when he pointed that out, I was listening. I wasn't like shutting it out. And I think that's like a big part of it is that people just want to hear what they want to hear, or they just want to assume what they think they already know, when there's people that might be telling them something they should pursue or consider. So I think it's just a level of being open that people remove.
That's really cool. And that actually harkens back to one of our earlier episodes with Corey, who we're both friends with, and who actually reconnected with us. Because when you moved to New York, we sort of lost touch. And then we just randomly met at this networking dinner that we were both invited to. Like,
you?
Wait, what? Yeah, right. All right.
Yeah.
And he had said the same thing. I was talking to him about like, how do you convince someone to buy your product? And he was like, I listen to them. And it seems like that ability to listen is such a key. It's such a key skill in the sales world. And have you always had that? Did you develop that? Like, what are the things that you do to improve your ability to listen?
I've always been a pretty good listener. I don't really like to talk about myself actually very often. And so inherently that's how I initially became a good listener. Like if I were like when I was dating or when I'd go out with my wife before we got married, she probably she would say like, I don't really know much about you. Like, what can you like tell me some things? So like that definitely was like a more of a natural thing that was happening. But when I look at where I am today, it's actually a lot of it leads back to this role that I had as a bellman. So I was a bellman for 4 years at the Marriott. Yeah.
Explain what a bellman is for folks who might be hearing that for the first time.
I mean, you're like a bag boy, I guess would be that, but I was much more than a bag boy. I was senior concierge, but you basically are like the front face of a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So first thing people see, you're getting them in the room, you're making sure they're set up properly. I would actually drive the shuttle to the airport. Fun story, I drove little John
no way.
To the airport. Yeah. And Rick Ross was with them too.
That's awesome.
So during that job, I mean, a lot of it is like being able to conflict mediate, like bring down any conflict, or when somebody's angry, they're upset about their room or something, like just being able to listen, address it, and those type of like customer service skills face to face. That is, I mean, I use that now. I mean, in any job or any position you go to, those skills are always going to be important. And then also at that job, it was a very business-oriented hotel. And so I was started to get exposed to the business world in a strange way, but being able to see like the way that things work and the way that interactions happen. So I was getting exposed to those type of things where I wouldn't have otherwise. And
really quick pause. We cut out there for a second. Before we cut out, the question that was on my mind was, you've been part of a lot of industries, sales and entertainment, things that sort of have a bit of lore around them. Kind of what you said, there's all the, thoughts of what a salesperson is or thoughts of what a celebrity is before you get into that space. And I think once you're in there, you sort of see, the reality of it. And I'm kind of, having a background in reality, I'm curious what are some of the things that maybe surprised you as you were in these fields and kind of learning about the day to day?
Yeah, I mean, there was good and bad within both. So within entertainment, I guess it wasn't that surprising that it wasn't as going to be. I mean, I guess it was surprising that it wasn't as glamorous as people might have expected or what I would have thought. Like when I first got there, I was reading through scripts and like really doing mundane things. And then even like as I got further into entertainment, even when you start meeting people and stuff, it just wasn't as like glamorous, to be frank. But I was very pleasantly surprised by the level of like human interaction I would still have with people, mainly like celebrities that were open and interested in hearing like what I do, where I'm from, my family, like just things that I would have assumed that they could care less about. So that was like one of the two things there. And then in the business world, especially with being at the hotel, I started to realize that like just because if somebody is a CEO doesn't mean they're a total jerk. I was meeting people that were running huge companies, and they also were very genuinely interested in who I was, and these are people that I would see regularly too, because they'd come into the hotel a lot, and they'd ask me how my final exams went the week before, and they'd ask me how that book that I was reading, like what did I think, and my opinion, and I started to realize that like there was a very like personal level of within both. So that was very surprising for me through both those different areas.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I feel like that's one of those things where you're sort of told that you need to get better at social skills and soft skills and things like that, but then to meet people who are really good, who like genuinely are really good at it, whether it's their personality type or they learned it or they have just understand how to take interest. And I think it's something that I'm always trying to get better at. But I think that you're sort of entering what most people would consider fairly intimidating environments, right? And talking to people that would normally make people nervous to be around. Like, I mean, folks get nervous just to go to a general networking event. And that's, and I kind of noticed that as one of the things that you're really amazing at, is building relationships quickly with pretty much anyone, right? We were hanging out the other day, and you were talking about how, you're friends with, you text, was it your dry cleaner or something?
Yeah, my dry cleaning lady. Yeah, we're on a text basis. Yeah.
Yeah. Like stuff that just blows my mind as a bit of an introvert and someone who comes from a family that's like, do not bother anyone ever for anything. Is that just natural for you, or is that something that you've honed and developed, or maybe a bit of both?
I think I've been fortunate that it's been natural. I don't know where and when it started. I think as a kid, I was in a military family. We moved a little more than the average. So I went to like a couple different elementary schools, but nothing like absurd. My family being foreign also meant that we traveled a lot. So I was engaged and interacted with a lot of different cultures. I think by the time I was like 20, I'd been to like 30 countries or something. And then just spending time overseas, like you really break down those barriers in terms of like the fear. It's just similar like when you're learning a language. It's like those initial first times you engage with somebody in another language. It's like a fear that you have to really break through and get over. So that kind of helped me. I mean, in high school, I was always social. I played multiple sports. I was like the homecoming king and like all that stuff. So I think what it was is I just genuinely liked people and their story. Like my friends always tell me, they're like, you're always able to find the positive or like the story from the person. And I think it's like, it's just interesting to me. Like we're going through our day to day, we interact with a lot of people, and it's more fun just to like know the background on that person, like where they're from and what are they doing here, and like just like general questions. But it's that type of engagement with people is really what led to like my last like 4 different jobs. I mean, things started to pick up, and a lot of it was attributed to that type of interest or that skill.
That's really cool, because I think there's a couple of things that stand out in there. The first one is, though you had maybe a more natural inclination towards these kinds of social skills and your the way your personality developed, it doesn't mean that you didn't still have that sort of, you mentioned earlier that fear. Like there is still like the fear of talking to someone in a new language, or like doing but you confronted those situations. You put yourself in those situations. Even this year, you were talking to me about how you're trying to do more public speaking and different things like that. And that's one of the trends that I'm seeing. I want to first of all come back to the idea of this led to a lot of your jobs. But as we go through and talk about what it is that has made your career and how you've been able to develop it so successfully, what I'm super curious about is like those areas in which you needed to push yourself further. You've always had these side projects. I'd love to dig a little bit into those side projects, because I think having side hustles and building things on the side, I would never have become a career coach if I didn't start doing networking events, which then led to coaching, which then led to like elevator pitch training, which then led to brand coaching, which then led to career coaching. So I'm curious, like, you've had your day jobs, let's say, and then you've had all of these other projects, and each one has probably helped you develop a different skill set, which probably played back into your job in a variety of ways. I'm kind of curious if if you could maybe walk us through a handful of the projects that you think were the most impactful in your life over the years.
Yeah. I've always had a side project. So when I did, to kind of like go back to that first sales job, that first job sucked. I didn't get to finish that part. So it was very boiler room sales. It was come in, print your own leads, just make dials the whole time. And so I knew that I was still confident that I wanted to stay in sales, but it was gonna run out pretty quickly at that place. So I ended up meeting a person one day, just out watching. I was watching football on a Sunday, and there was a woman who had a California San Diego Chargers jersey on, and I was from California, so we struck up a conversation. And it turned out she was running a company that was identical to what I was doing, but it was just her and a couple people. And so she was doing the same conference type sales, sponsorships that I was doing in this like boiler room job. But she was doing it on her own, and she had a really good network. And I started to look into like the people she would have at her events, and they were all CMO of Best Buy, CMO of Nordstrom's, and like all the top people. And that's when I kind of realized there was an opportunity to make a move. And it wasn't going to happen just overnight. She was a small company, and so that became to me was like a side project, where I knew it was an opportunity, but I wasn't jumping ship out of my full-time role necessarily. So she had a small office in the Hancock Tower in Chicago, and after work every day, I would go over there, and from like 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., I would do a lot of her admin stuff and just like plugging in data for her and like slowly giving her like my feedback and my recommendations, offering to get on the phone for her and making calls. So I started like it became like a daily thing where I was going there every day after work, and I'd get home late. But I could see the big picture, and so I kept pushing through it. So I did that for about 6 months. And eventually she came to me and she was like, we've been doing this for 6 months. I want to extend a full-time role to you. The pay that she offered me was about 3 times what I was making at the time.
Wow.
So it was just a really cool opportunity, but it took just that know-how and like kind of the realization of an opportunity, and then just some extra sweat and equity. And I kind of learned at that time that my most valuable asset was time, and just being able to allocate time and pursue something like that.
Were you being paid for those evenings that you worked for 6 months?
No, it was unpaid.
That is such an important thing to call out. That so many people that I work with, I'm like, volunteer somewhere, join an organization, work for free, build the brand, your personal brand, your experience, and get out there. But they're like, well, if I work for free, then I won't get paid. And I'm like, well, you're currently not getting paid because you're in the job search. So what are you going to do? Wait a year before you make any money? And so I think that's such an interesting perspective to have taken, and a leeway you've given yourself. It's almost like leaving more doors open, leaving more opportunities, or bringing more opportunities and putting them on the table. And so, and it paid off 3x, right?
Yeah.
It's not like you never got paid for that work. You just got paid after she hired you 6 months later.
Right. It came back around. I think people, it comes down to like it's a fear thing again. And so not everybody's in a position to be able to do these things. Like I realized that I was fortunate enough to have a job that allowed for that type of flexibility to like fit it into my schedule. But I think people, it's a combination of like fear and ego. Ego is a big part.
Mm.
And if you're unable to really strip that down and be willing to do something that it's not where you want to be now, but if you can't put your ego aside and just do it in the interim, like you're not going to get there kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and did you feel like you had to take a step back each time you made a transition in your career?
On my next move from there, I took a step back, and I did that for a few years, where we would put on this big forum for CMOs. So it was all the CMOs of like the biggest companies. They all knew me. I used to sell all the sponsorships. So I got Yahoo and MasterCard and these companies that would give us money to come to the event. So that became my role. As I was going to these events, and like I got to meet people like Ray Kurzweil and different futurists that were in the tech world, I knew that tech was like the next move that I wanted to make. And so what I did was I ended up taking a job at a company here in Chicago called Groupon.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, at the time, they were tech for Chicago. The tech community has evolved immensely in Chicago since then. But for me, it was my break into tech, and it meant a pay cut. And so that there was a pay cut that I took to just get myself into the industry. And so that was that step back in my career. But it's what led to me really building a career in tech, was that initial move.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that, you mentioned that you saw how it fit into the bigger picture. I think so often we're too focused on the short-term gains and losses, and we lose sight of the long-term benefit. And I know you're someone who thinks about, properties and investments and all sorts of stuff that I'm not even quite at that level yet, but I'm always so curious how like someone will forego a little bit of money now that might get them to the bigger money.
Yeah.
Because they're not getting the dollar amount they want today. And then on the flip side, people who will take the first job that's given to them without really thinking about the long-term implications of where that'll lead you in your career. Yeah. Were there any things that you did early on, or people or experiences that you were exposed to that gave you that sort of big picture thinking? I think for me, it was entrepreneurship, Tim Ferriss, a whole bunch of other things that are now cliche, but I'm kind of curious, what opened your mind up to it? Or was that again, something from your childhood and your travels and things like that?
I mean, money was actually always an important part growing up. We didn't talk about money a lot, but we weren't rich by any means. We were definitely like living on the lower side. So I was motivated by money for sure. And I'd say I'm still motivated by money today. I don't know where it came, where I started to put that aside and start focusing on the other aspects of the career. I had a mentor when I was doing the events company, and I think he used to instill those type of ideas in my head. And he would say things like, don't worry about what you're doing now. Like, he's like, I know you're going to be my boss someday. And he would say things like that. And that kind of like instilled a level of confidence in me, where I was like, well, this guy, he was a CMO of Bon-Ton stores. Like, he was like the CMO of like at retailers. And he's saying things like, I'm going to be his boss. But he recognized that like my knowledge in tech and those things like eventually like would be helpful for me. So I think hearing those conversations allowed me to put the money driven part aside and really just focus on what I was doing.
That's awesome. And mentorship is something that comes up a lot when I'm talking to folks. They either want their companies to provide them a mentor. They're like, so what kind of mentorship will I have in this job? And I'm like, and you're doing bad in this interview because you're asking the wrong questions. But they either expect a mentor to be given, which that's like expecting, I don't know, like a relationship to be given to you in my mind. But like, or they just think that it's like something you can buy, or all these different things. And I think
Yeah.
you can get mentors from books, you can get mentors from YouTube, you can get mentors from, taking online courses, you can get them in person, you can from coworkers and all sorts of different places. But I'm kind of curious, like you talked about that as always like a very mentorship. Like what did that look like? And how was that? So how did you find that mentor in your life?
Yeah, I mean, luckily it was somebody that I was working with, and it's very challenging to find that person. That mentor of mine actually passed away, and since then, I've never really had anyone like that to go to. And what that it's shown me is that I'm getting a little bit older than the people I work with now, so it's starting to happen. And so it just, the fact that I've gone the last like 10 years without someone like that has motivated me to be a mentor to others as much as I can. So if you can't find a mentor, you can always be a mentor. And I think that's something that people forget, is even if you're like 5 years into your career, you're 5 years ahead of that person that just got hired. So I do a lot of that now. Just trying to kind of give back, because I feel like if I would have had someone like really helping me, it's only going to help accelerate their careers. And so I try to do that as much as I can now.
That's awesome. We were talking a little bit about the big picture. And when we talk about the big picture, time becomes a huge piece of what we start to think about. I think early on, we sort of prioritize a lot of different things, but as we go on throughout our career, time becomes so much more important. And I'm kind of curious, you mentioned that that's something you're putting a lot more thought into. How have you seen that change over the years, and how do you sort of think about time these days?
Time's one of those things where the older I get, the more I realize like anything I do is attributed to my ability to create time for myself, for personal, for professional. One of my friends, his name's Drew. He was we were talking about this actually, and he was saying, he's like, people tell me that they don't want to get up early in the morning because they're not morning people. And he's like, well, like what kind of person are you? Does that mean you're like a night person? So you're just up all night? Like nobody's like a morning person. But you train yourself to do that in an effort to create more time for yourself throughout the day. I was initially turned on to this by a podcast called the 5 a.m. Miracle Morning podcast.
Cool.
And yeah, this guy's whole thing is just like, look, you get up at 5 a.m. He's like, you're giving yourself like 2-3 extra hours in the day that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So I've taken that to full heart. I don't get up quite at 5. I think I'm pushing more like 5:45, maybe like 5:30. But that little amount of like change allows me to figure out give me more time during the day to work on things outside of just my day to day. So at each different stage of my career, I've always been doing things on the side, and people are like, well, how the hell, like, how are you doing this? Like, I don't understand. But it's mornings, it's nights. I have a daughter now, she's 2.5. So it's even harder now, but you're still able to do it. You just have to make time.
Yeah.
But it's definitely the most valuable commodity for all of us.
And it's so much different than the mindset you hear of, oh, once I have kids, I guess I have to stop doing all the things I love. Got to stop being part of these groups. It's like, what are you talking about? It's just about prioritization. And I feel like so often, one of the greatest things to do is to sit down and actually add up what you do with your time and analyze it like legit. Oh, wow, I thought that I was sleeping 8 hours, but really I was waking up and then laying in bed for an hour looking at Imgur or something like that.
Yeah.
And just realizing that like there is so much time wasted that is so passive we don't even see it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's I think the most crucial part of time being wasted is like the final part of your day. I think that we all have a custom, this habit of just like, I need to turn off, so I need to watch some TV. And like, sure, like I get it, I do it too. every night for like an
Mm.
hour or two. But I still make sure I'm going to bed early enough to where I can get up early enough and to be as productive as I want to be. I think it's easy to get sucked into that. Like, I'm just sitting up. So I've catch myself like kind of like setting parameters around, like almost like setting rules of myself. Like in 10 minutes, you're going to get up, you're going to turn off the TV, walk away. It doesn't matter if the episode's over. Like it's not, we live in a day of on demand. So that's like one thing. And then the other thing is just in terms of like the weekends. I mean, we like the weekends are a time to rest and relax, but that doesn't mean you don't need to take like 2-3 hours of the day to get some stuff done.
Mm.
Some people aren't really into that. I mean, they feel like we already work enough. But if you want to do things outside of your day to day and you want to make a transition or a move, maybe you have to do that for a couple months. It just depends what you're trying to do.
And I think it's also refocusing what work is, right? I think a lot like this is technically work for me, right? Like creating content, but it's enjoyable and it's something that I look forward to. And so when I'm doing it, it's not like when I was doing spreadsheets in my first job on the weekends and I hated everything in life. It's a completely different thing. And, I'm fine being on a call till 6. I'm fine working on the weekends and editing at night. And I think so much of it becomes like the question you probably get asked is like, well, how do you do it all? How do you have your job and your family and your side projects? It's like, well, it's by not doing other things, or by making more time for these things. And one of the biggest changes that I've seen is that you will it's almost like if you buy a house that's too big, you will buy enough stuff to fill those rooms. If you open up your day with enough time, you will find things to waste that time with. And so when I look at a day and it says you're free from this block till this block, and it's a big chunk of time, I'm like, shit, I'm going to be way less productive in that time block. When I look at my calendar and it's back-to-back stuff with 20 minutes in between stuff, I'm like, those are going to be some serious 20 minutes of getting some shit done. And I feel that approach really helps. And for me, it's deadlines too. Setting a goal to be on a live stream every morning at 8 a.m. I've never had such a consistent sleep schedule in my entire life. And like just a little change like that. And the coolest thing is once you start doing these things, it forces you to look at and confront other areas of your life where you're not performing at your best. In order to go to bed on time, you have to contend with the other people in the house who are preventing you from getting to bed at time. And so you actually have to learn how to deal with conflict, how to deal with people, how to negotiate. Like there's all these amazing opportunities to learn that come out of putting a restriction in one area of your life.
Yeah. I mean, the funny part about the negotiation thing, it was like a year ago. I was like, I'm going to start going to the gym in the mornings. I can't do afternoons. I'm going to go from 7:30 to 8:30. And my wife was just like, no, you're not. That's like the prime time when our daughter wakes up. Like that's not when you're going. You can't go to the gym in the mornings. Like, don't even think about it. So that's when I started going to the gym at 6. So I'm done by 7. I'm back before either of them are even awake. So that's funny you mentioned that. But I think what you were like kind of touched on for a second back there was when you're putting in the extra hours, like you said on the weekends you were doing spreadsheets and you were doing like some stuff that wasn't enjoyable. I think it's also a huge factor is like when you actually enjoy what you're doing, it's not such a big burden to add in those extra hours.
Yeah.
When I'm working after work, like I have a startup. It's been about 1.5 years and we've got like 20 customers. It's just fun. Like, I'm like, this is my baby. I'm building this myself. Everything that we do, every deal we close is like coming direct to us. Like it's cool. So it doesn't become as much work. It's just more of like a fun challenge. And so it's okay to fill those hours with something because it's a little more fun.
100%, dude. And like, I think that's really what we're trying to talk about here. It's like all the experimentation you've done throughout your life and your career, all the new things that you've learned, it keeps pushing you. It's like it's almost like a funnel, right? You're like trying a ton of stuff and
Hmm.
then less and less and less. And it's like, well, now of course I want to wake up and do this thing because that's what I do. And I like this idea of, I study a lot of stoicism of like, once you've said you're going to do something, it's not a question of if I'm going to do it. It's just, this is the duty. This is what I do.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just go, I show up. I don't even like contemplate the weather before I walk out the door. I just put on the jacket and show up. And I think
Totally.
once you get into that rhythm, I mean, the people that are the most productive are the people who have the most going on. There's a great quote of like, the person that I don't want to give the project to is the person who has all the time in the world to do my project.
Nice.
That
Yeah.
person will never get it done.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Yeah. No,
Um, yeah, go on.
it's a good point. I mean, if you can get in that routine, my director here at my full-time job, he's told me before. He's like, I really appreciate how like when you say you're going to do something, you just do it, and I think that's a big. It's just holding yourself accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm going to verbally externally say, hey, I'm going to do this, it's part of like kind of like a strategy I do with myself. It's like, well, you said it out loud, like now you got to do it. But yeah, it's one of those things. Like once you just get in the routine, though, it doesn't take that long. We've all read the books of like The Power of Habit and all these books that talk about it. Like it's 30 days of something, whatever the number is. But it's like everyone can do it.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of like breaking through that.
Yeah, I'm 2 months into the live stream and I'm waking up before my alarm now. So it's like, it goes pretty quick.
Yeah, there you go.
You adjust pretty fast. And I went to bed at 2 or 3 last night because I decided to launch a Patreon.
I think I got an
at
email
midnight.
from you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't normally do that, but I decided to launch a Patreon account last night and then I got sucked out of
nice.
the hole. But yeah, and so those are the kinds of things that I think are really fascinating. And I think this concept of like, you keep chipping away at the block and eventually you start to see the sculpture emerge and you're like, all right, that's what it is. That's where I'm headed with this. Our internet is unstable. I really hope we don't get kicked off right in the end here.
No.
So I want to do a quick recap of my favorite points of the conversation so far. And then I'm going to ask you the final question and then I'll let you go for the evening.
All right, cool.
My big takeaways here are: number one, listen to yourself and listen to others, and don't jump, to a defensive mode. Like actually hear what people are saying that you're good at or bad at or should be doing or shouldn't be doing, and see if you can be critical and incorporate it. Number two, experiment. Try lots of things to figure out what you're good at and push the boundaries of what you could be good at. Look at the big picture and use your time wisely. So thank you for those amazing takeaways today. I'm really excited to share these out. And my last question for you is if you could go back, I know the cheesiest questions, right? That's what we do here at Career Therapy. If you could go back to Eddie at an early part in your career, you get to pick the age, but it's got to be early on.
All right.
What would you say to that? What age would it be, and what would you say to that version of yourself?
Yeah, I think I would go back to that 25-year-old who just moved to Chicago. So that job was, like I mentioned, just making 120 calls a day, 3 hours of talk time. You had to earn computer time because we didn't have computers. So I would tell myself then, everything you're doing right now sucks, but it is going to pay off in the long run. Because each of these cold calls you're making is just more experience that you're going to apply in a different way later on. But don't hate yourself. Don't hate your life every day right now because it's going to be okay. That would be the advice.
Don't hate your life right now. It's going to be okay. I love it. That's the kind of inspiration. It was
brutal, man. It was like one of those jobs where you go downstairs to grab lunch and like everybody's down there like chain smoking, stressed out. And it's just like, don't worry. It's going to pay off.
That's awesome. Well, Eddie, I really appreciate you joining. I appreciate you dealing with all the technical issues. Hopefully we didn't lose too much. If we did, we'll redo it. But sure. Where can people find you, and what would you like to maybe share out or promote to the community?
Let's see. Yeah, I think LinkedIn's the best way to find me. Just my name. It's pretty easy to find. I promote my startup because that's my new baby. It's partnerportal.io. And if you want to go check it out, let me know what you think. Always interested to get new users to try it out.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and best of luck with everything. Appreciate you stopping by.
All right, man. Good talking to you. All right, see you, man.
Hey there, listeners. Thanks for hanging out to the end of the episode here. Martin back with a quick request for you. If you enjoyed this episode, I would encourage you to head over to our Patreon page and support what we're doing here at Career Therapy. Our entire goal with the content that we create is to help people build confidence in their careers and land jobs that are a great fit for their lifetime. If you join our Patreon for just the price of a cappuccino, a cup of coffee once per month, you can get access to direct message coaching, live streams, the podcast, and even some exclusive content. We have a couple other tiers that include group coaching and one-on-one coaching as well, if you're interested in those things. But I just wanted to say thank you for listening. For those of you who are able to support the podcast in other ways and maybe become a financial contributor here on Patreon, I very much appreciate you keeping the lights on here. And I hope that everything is going well in your career and your job search. I'll see you on the next episode.